In the heart of Calgary, where the Rockies kiss the sky and communities thrive in harmony, darkness can sometimes lurk in the most unsuspecting places. This is the story of Audrey Trudeau, a dedicated physiotherapist, a beloved friend, and a sister. Her life was a beacon of hope and compassion, but it was tragically cut short in a manner that still haunts those who knew her. In February 1999, Audrey Trudeau was on the brink of a major new chapter in her life. After years of living in Alberta, she had decided to make the life-changing move back to Ontario to be closer to her family. Audrey, always a dedicated and compassionate nurse, had long dreamed of starting fresh in her hometown, where she could embrace new career opportunities and reunite with loved ones. Her colleagues at Rocky View Hospital, where she had worked for several years, were fully aware of her decision and had mixed feelings, sadness at her departure but excitement for the new journey she was about to embark on. To honor her commitment to her job and the bonds she had formed with them over the years, her co-workers organized a heartfelt farewell. The event, planned for the last week of February, was meant to be a celebration of Audrey's career, marked by laughter, shared memories of late-night shifts and difficult cases, and a lot of heartfelt well-wishing for her next chapter. Audrey's presence at the hospital had been a source of comfort for both her colleagues and the patients she cared for, so this event was as much about expressing gratitude as it was about her transition. As the day approached, the gathering was set to be a reflection of the love and respect she had earned, not just as a physiotherapist, but as a friend. But, in a cruel twist of fate, this moment of celebration would soon be overshadowed by an unimaginable tragedy, one that would leave her family, friends, and community reeling, and would forever alter the course of Audrey's life in ways no one could have predicted. The night before the farewell, she had seemed her usual self, excited, yet calm, as she wrapped up her final shift at Rocky View Hospital. She had promised to join her colleagues for the farewell gathering, but as the hours passed on the day of the event, Audrey's absence grew more and more conspicuous. Her friends and co-workers initially brushed it off, assuming she was simply running late or caught in traffic, a delay she had often chalked up to her busy schedule. However, when she missed her final shift at the hospital and failed to show up to catch her flight to Ontario, anxiety began to take hold. Her phone went unanswered. Calls and text messages left on her voicemail received no reply. Friends, family, and co-workers, who had all been eagerly anticipating her fresh start, found themselves staring at their phones in confusion and growing concern. The absence of Audrey, a woman who had always been reliable and punctual, felt like a gaping hole in the lives of those who knew her. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because you don't want to miss the next terrifying twist. As the hours dragged on, the once hopeful anticipation of a new beginning was replaced by an unsettling sense of dread. Friends began calling around, checking if anyone had heard from Audrey. The more they tried to reach her, the more the situation felt increasingly out of place. Her mother, who had eagerly anticipated the reunion in Ontario, grew frantic. Audrey's silence, a void where there was once a constant stream of communication, was not only alarming but deeply out of character. It was as though she had vanished, leaving behind no clues as to her whereabouts. Soon, those closest to her began to fear that something far more threatening had happened, but no one could have anticipated just how grave the situation would soon become. She was the kind of person who, regardless of the situation, always found time for others. Whether it was offering a listening ear after a difficult shift or volunteering to help a colleague in need, Audrey's nurturing nature made her beloved by everyone who worked with her at Rocky View Hospital. One particular example of her selflessness was her willingness to help Deborah Point, a co-worker who had recently fallen on hard times. Deborah, dealing with personal issues and a strained living situation, had no immediate place to stay. Audrey, who had always been attuned to the struggles of those around her, didn't hesitate to extend a helping hand. Without a second thought, she offered Deborah a temporary place to stay at her home. Audrey's gesture was as genuine as it was generous. She saw it as a short-term solution, a way to offer comfort and security to someone who seemed to be carrying a heavy burden. Audrey's home, a cozy and inviting space, was always open to friends and colleagues who needed a break from the chaos of daily life. She believed in the power of simple acts of kindness, especially when it came to offering a roof over someone's head. Deborah was grateful for the gesture, and the arrangement was initially meant to be temporary, just enough time for Deborah to get back on her feet. Yet, what started as a well-intentioned offer of goodwill soon became a pivotal moment in both women's lives. Audrey, always the optimist, never anticipated that her kindness could become entangled in a series of events that would eventually spiral out of control. The dynamic of the two women living together, once simple and filled with gratitude, was about to shift in a way no one could have foreseen. What was meant to be a short-term act of kindness would unknowingly set the stage for a tragedy that would forever change Audrey's life. For a while, the arrangement seemed harmless, even harmonious. Deborah appeared genuinely grateful for Audrey's support, and Audrey felt fulfilled knowing she was helping a friend in need. However, as weeks turned into months, subtle cracks began to appear in their dynamic. Audrey started noticing small but troubling inconsistencies. Items in her home seemed to go missing without explanation, like jewelry, small electronics, and personal belongings she was certain she hadn't misplaced. The turning point came when Audrey began noticing unexplainable withdrawals from her bank account. At first, she thought it was a simple banking error or perhaps a forgotten transaction. But as she scrutinized her statements, the pattern became clear. Someone was accessing her finances without her consent. This realization sent a chill down her spine. What had started as a selfless act of kindness was unraveling into a nightmare. Audrey was torn between confronting Deborah and giving her the benefit of the doubt, as the thought of betrayal from someone she had trusted so deeply felt both devastating and surreal. The growing sense of unease left Audrey questioning every interaction, every decision, and every ounce of trust she had placed in Deborah. Audrey's trust, so generously and wholeheartedly given, was being taken advantage of in the most devastating way. The growing evidence left her no choice but to confront Deborah. One evening, after gathering her courage, Audrey approached Deborah with her concerns. She laid out the bank statements showing the unauthorized withdrawals and brought up the missing items, her voice firm but calm. At first, Deborah reacted with shock and outright denial, insisting that Audrey was mistaken. She claimed she had nothing to do with the irregularities and tried to deflect blame. But as Audrey continued to press, Deborah's demeanor shifted. Her denial turned into anger, and her voice grew sharp and defensive. She accused Audrey of treating her like a criminal and made bitter remarks about how Audrey's so-called generosity had always been condescending. Then, the truth slipped out. In a fit of frustration, Deborah admitted to taking the money but tried to justify it by claiming she had no other choice. She argued that Audrey owed her for providing companionship and emotional support, saying that she wouldn't have had to resort to such measures if Audrey had offered to help more freely. Audrey was stunned by the audacity of Deborah's reasoning and by the resentment laced in her words. When Audrey demanded that Deborah leave the house immediately, Deborah flatly refused. She planted herself firmly in the home, claiming she had nowhere else to go and that Audrey had no right to throw her out after everything she'd done for her. Deborah's behavior became increasingly volatile over the following days. She would sulk in silence one moment and lash out the next, creating a tense and hostile atmosphere. Deborah began asserting control over the household, making Audrey feel like a stranger in her own home. She moved Audrey's belongings without permission, changed routines, and even invited her own friends over without asking. Audrey, trapped in a situation she couldn't easily escape, felt helpless and increasingly fearful. What had started as an act of kindness had become a nightmare of manipulation and emotional turmoil. The tension between them continued to escalate, and Audrey realized she was living under constant stress and fear. The confrontation had set off a chain of events that neither of them could stop, ultimately leading to an unthinkable tragedy that no one could have foreseen. Months of tension and uncertainty culminated in a harrowing discovery that shook the quiet Calgary neighborhood to its core. For weeks, Audrey, usually vibrant and social, had seemingly vanished without a trace. Friends, co-workers, and neighbors grew increasingly concerned as she missed work, ignored calls, and failed to show up at places she frequented. Meanwhile, Deborah, who still resided in Audrey's home, carried on as though nothing was out of the ordinary. In the days following their heated exchanges, Deborah began behaving strangely. Neighbors observed her coming and going at odd hours, often in a hurried and agitated state. One evening, she was seen carefully arranging and securing 3 large boxes. Deborah, ever meticulous, dressed the tops of the boxes with garlic and other odd items, muttering softly as if performing some kind of ritual. Once satisfied with her preparations, she loaded the boxes into her truck, brushing off a neighbor's curious glance with a curt nod. Audrey's unexplained disappearance cast a heavy shadow over the neighborhood, with whispers and speculation circulating among those who had known her. The quiet suburb that had once been a picture of calm was now gripped by unease, as the seeds of tragedy began to surface. Deborah parked her truck in the dimly lit driveway, the tires crunching over the gravel as she shifted into park. She unloaded the 3 large boxes from the back of her truck with deliberate care. The tops of the boxes were adorned with garlic and other odd items, but Deborah moved with an eerie calm as she carried them into the garage. Her actions were methodical, but there was no sign of the erratic behavior that had previously unsettled neighbors. As she placed each box in the corner of the garage, Deborah spoke casually to a neighbor who happened to be outside. She mentioned that she was planning to leave the city soon and would need to pick up the boxes after she returned. The neighbor, seeing nothing out of the ordinary, nodded and went on with their day, unaware of the macabre contents the boxes would soon hold. With the boxes carefully stored, Deborah closed the garage door behind her and returned inside. The air was filled with the pungent scent of garlic, but Deborah showed no signs of discomfort or urgency. She seemed calm, as if it were a normal errand, and there was no reason for anyone to suspect the horror she was preparing. Weeks later, a foul, choking smell began to seep from the garage, growing more intense and unbearable with each passing day. The odor was so strong that it became impossible to ignore. One of the neighbors, increasingly disturbed by the stench, decided to investigate. They approached the garage, noticing the putrid smell growing stronger as they got closer. Realizing it was coming from inside, the neighbor hesitated for a moment before deciding to open the garage door. What they found inside was a scene of utter chaos. The garage was disheveled, papers and files scattered across the floor, swirling around the 3 boxes that had been stored there weeks before. The boxes, once carefully placed and sealed, now seemed out of place amidst the mess. Curiosity mixed with dread as the neighbor cautiously approached the boxes. With shaking hands, they opened one of them. The sight inside was so horrific that it immediately sent a wave of terror through the neighbor. Without wasting another moment, they slammed the box shut and rushed to call the police. The contents were beyond comprehension, something so gruesome that they knew the authorities needed to be involved immediately. When the police arrived and opened the boxes, the chilling reality of what had transpired became tragically clear. The community would never be the same after that day, as the discovery unraveled a horrific truth that had been hidden in plain sight. The police began their investigation as soon as the neighbor called them, their first task being to trace how the boxes ended up in the garage and who had kept them there. They quickly realized that the boxes had been stored in that garage for weeks, undisturbed, until the overpowering smell finally led to their discovery. When questioned, the neighbor recalled seeing Deborah moving the boxes into the garage and mentioned that Deborah had said she would be picking them up when she returned to the city. The neighbor pointed directly to Deborah, confirming that she had seen her bringing the boxes to the garage and was the last person known to have access to them. The authorities wasted no time, searching Deborah's home and her interactions with Audrey in the days leading up to her disappearance. What they uncovered was chilling. Audrey had been dismembered with a disturbing precision, her remains carefully concealed in a manner that suggested not just panic, but a cold, deliberate effort to erase her existence. The boxes, each one meticulously packed, were a grim indication of the brutal method used to disfigure and hide the evidence. It became clear that the act had been planned, and the brutality of the dismemberment shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The placement of the body parts in the boxes, along with the effort to cover it all up, pointed to a level of calculation and detachment that went beyond mere violence. This was a deliberate, methodical attempt to erase Audrey from the world. Her life snuffed out with such cold precision that it made the community shudder. The outrage over the crime was immediate and profound. People who had known Audrey, who had once seen her as a kind, trusting individual, now struggled to reconcile the sweet, caring woman they remembered with the brutal act of violence that had taken her life. The shockwaves from the discovery rippled through the neighborhood, and the search for answers turned into a deep and troubling look into the dark undercurrents of Deborah's life. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they began to uncover more about Deborah's troubled background. A key piece of the puzzle emerged when it was revealed that Deborah Point had been struggling with a severe gambling addiction for years. Her addiction had taken a devastating toll on her finances, and her mounting debts had pushed her to desperate measures. In her time living with Audrey, Deborah saw an opportunity to exploit the kindness and trust Audrey had shown her. Deborah had forged checks and siphoned over $5,100 from Audrey's personal accounts, using the money to fuel her gambling habit. Audrey had begun to notice small discrepancies in her finances, missing items, unexplained withdrawals, and a sense that something was wrong, but she never imagined that Deborah would betray her to this extent. It was only after Audrey confronted Deborah about the financial irregularities that things took a horrific turn. In their heated exchange, Deborah, cornered and desperate, felt the walls closing in around her. She had already burned bridges with friends and family over her addiction, and the prospect of being caught and facing legal consequences was too much to bear. In her panic and frustration, Deborah made a chilling decision. When Audrey demanded to know where the money had gone, Deborah's response was as cold as it was brutal. "You don't understand, Audrey. I needed that money to survive. You left me with no choice." The venom in her voice and the wild look in her eyes betrayed the darkness that had taken hold of her. Fearing the truth would destroy everything, and that Audrey would expose her, Deborah snapped. In a fit of rage and panic, Deborah attacked Audrey. The violence was swift and calculated, her actions fueled by a need to silence Audrey, to ensure she would never reveal the theft. Once Audrey was dead, Deborah's next move was equally chilling. She dismembered her body with a cold, clinical precision. This was no act of rage, it was a deliberate attempt to erase all evidence of her crime, to ensure that Audrey's death would never be linked back to her. As Deborah calmly disposed of the body, carefully packing it into boxes, she spoke to herself as though justifying her actions. "It's the only way. No one can know. No one can stop me now." Her chilling words revealed the depths of her desperation and her willingness to go to extreme lengths to cover up her crime. The courtroom became a theater of justice, its atmosphere heavy with tension as the trial of Deborah Point began. Every seat was filled, with spectators, reporters, and grieving friends and family members of Audrey all gathered to witness the unfolding of a case that had shocked the community to its core. Deborah Point, accused of second-degree murder, sat at the defense table, her expression a carefully constructed mask of composure. She maintained her innocence throughout the trial, insisting that Audrey's death was an unfortunate accident rather than a deliberate act. Her defense team worked to paint a picture of a woman overwhelmed by circumstances, claiming she had no intention to harm Audrey and that the dismemberment was an act of panic rather than malice. Prosecutors, however, presented a starkly different narrative. They meticulously laid out the evidence against Deborah, highlighting her financial exploitation of Audrey, her gambling addiction, and the chilling steps she had taken to conceal the crime. The forged checks, the carefully packed boxes, and the use of garlic to mask the smell were all damning pieces of evidence that painted a picture of premeditation and deliberate cruelty. Key witnesses took the stand, including the neighbor who had seen Deborah storing the boxes in the garage and had later discovered their contents. Their testimony added a human dimension to the horror, recounting Deborah's calm demeanor and her casual mention of leaving the city, an apparent attempt to evade detection. Throughout the trial, the prosecution sought to unravel Deborah's claims of innocence, questioning her on her actions and decisions after Audrey's death. "Why didn't you call the police if it was an accident?" the prosecutor demanded during a particularly intense cross-examination. Deborah's answers were evasive, her composure faltering under the weight of the evidence. The jury sat rapt, their faces reflecting a mixture of disbelief and resolve as they listened to the chilling details of the crime. Photos, forensic evidence, and testimony from investigators painted a grim picture of the events that led to Audrey's tragic death. For the family and friends of Audrey, the trial was a painful ordeal, forcing them to relive the tragedy over and over. Many broke down in tears during the proceedings, particularly during the prosecutor's closing arguments, which emphasized the trust Audrey had placed in Deborah and how that trust had been brutally betrayed. As the trial drew to a close, the courtroom braced itself for the verdict. Would justice be served, or would Deborah's insistence on her innocence sway the jury? For the community, the trial was more than just a legal battle, it was a reckoning with the darkness that had shattered their sense of safety and trust. Despite Deborah Point's repeated denials and claims of innocence, the evidence against her was overwhelming. The forged checks, the detailed forensic analysis of the crime scene, and the chilling testimony from witnesses painted a damning picture of her guilt. Prosecutors had successfully dismantled her defense, arguing that her actions, both during and after Audrey's tragic death, demonstrated a calculated and deliberate attempt to cover up a heinous crime. When the jury was finally dismissed to deliberate, the courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. Hours stretched into a tense day as those present waited for the decision. Family and friends of Audrey sat with bated breath, their hands clenched tightly, while Deborah remained motionless, her face betraying no emotion. The jury returned after just 6 hours of deliberation, their verdict clear and unanimous. Deborah Point was found guilty of second-degree murder. The room erupted with emotion, gasps from the gallery, muffled sobs from Audrey's loved ones, and murmurs of relief that justice was finally being served. Deborah sat stone-faced, her reaction unervingly stoic as the weight of the verdict settled over her. In the sentencing phase, the judge addressed the court with somber gravity. He acknowledged the profound betrayal of trust at the core of the crime and the deliberate measures Deborah had taken to conceal her actions. This was not just a moment of rage, the judge stated, his voice heavy with the responsibility of the sentence. This was a calculated and callous act that robbed a kind and trusting woman of her life. The court cannot overlook the severity of these actions. Deborah Point was sentenced to life imprisonment, with no possibility of parole for 20 years. The sentence reflected not only the heinous nature of the crime but also the devastating impact it had on Audrey's family, friends, and the entire community. For those who had loved Audrey, the sentence brought a measure of closure but not relief. Her sister, speaking outside the courtroom after the verdict, captured the shared grief. "Nothing can bring Audrey back, but at least we know she has justice now. We'll carry her memory with us forever." As Deborah was led away in handcuffs, the courtroom began to empty, the echoes of the gavel still lingering in the air. The community would take years to heal from the scars left by the crime, but the guilty verdict stood as a testament to their resilience and determination to honor Audrey's life. In 2024, after serving nearly 25 years behind bars, Deborah Point was granted full parole, a decision that reignited public debate and left many grappling with complex emotions. For some, the news came as a bitter reminder of the brutal crime that had forever changed the lives of Audrey's loved ones and scarred the community. Others saw it as a testament to the justice system's belief in rehabilitation, though many questioned whether someone capable of such a calculated and horrific act could ever truly change. During her parole hearing, Deborah expressed remorse, claiming that her years in prison had allowed her to reflect on her actions and confront the consequences of her choices. She spoke of the programs she had participated in and the steps she had taken to better herself. "I know I can never undo the pain I caused," she said, her voice trembling. "But I hope to spend the rest of my life making amends, however I can." Despite these statements, the decision to grant her parole sparked outrage among many, particularly Audrey's family, who felt that the punishment did not truly fit the crime. "We lost someone who can never come back," Audrey's sister said in a public statement. "Deborah may have served her time, but we're still living with the pain every single day." As Deborah walked out of prison a free woman, questions lingered. Was her remorse genuine, or was it another performance? Could someone who had committed such a heinous act ever truly be rehabilitated? Now, we turn the question to you. Do you believe Deborah deserved parole after serving nearly 25 years for her crime? Was justice served, or should she have remained behind bars for the rest of her life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.